While you refine your strategy, someone else is accumulating imperfect repetitions. While you reorganize your goals, someone else is making visible mistakes and learning. The gap doesn't show in the first month. It shows years later, when you can explain everything, but you haven't built anything. Maybe the problem isn't lack of planning. Maybe it's planning replacing action. You believe planning is maturity, organizing your week, structuring goals, breaking objectives into micro steps, designing systems, optimizing workflows, using productivity apps. You look at your full calendar and feel moral reassurance. You're not lost, you're organized. And organization feels like progress. The belief is simple. The more you plan, the more you advance. If something didn't happen, the structure wasn't good enough. If you didn't execute, you needed a better system. If you feel overwhelmed, you need to rearrange priorities. If you feel stuck, you need more clarity. Planning has become synonymous with intelligent preparation. Almost no one questions that. On the contrary, planning is praised. People who don't plan are impulsive. People who don't structure are careless. People who don't systematize are immature. But there's a possibility that rarely gets considered. What if your planning isn't preparing you? What if it's protecting you? Planning reduces uncertainty. When you write down what needs to be done, the task shrinks psychologically. When you divide a large objective into smaller pieces, it feels manageable. When you map out your month, chaos appears controlled. The mind prefers maps. It prefers direction over ambiguity. If someone wants to start studying, creating a schedule seems logical. If someone wants to launch a business, drafting a plan feels responsible. If someone wants to get in shape, designing a routine appears necessary. Intelligent people do this. Disciplined people do this. High performers talk about systems. Planning creates a mental environment where everything feels under control, even if nothing has actually started. You open a productivity app and feel productive. You buy a new notebook and feel committed. You redesign your roadmap and feel focused. There's also social validation. Planning is visible. You can show your system, explain your strategy, share your framework. Execution is quiet. Planning is presentable. And above all, planning is safe. As long as everything remains theoretical, there's no real exposure, no public judgment, no measurable failure. You can't fail at a draft the same way you can fail in reality. That's why it looks prudent. But excessive prudence has another name. There is an invisible line between preparation and postponement. You can spend weeks organizing your study plan without studying, months designing a project without launching, years being almost ready. From the outside, it still looks like effort. You revise timelines, adjust priorities, optimize frameworks, switch tools. But what remains untouched? Usually, it's the part that involves exposure, sending the proposal, publishing the content, launching the product, making the call, showing the work, real action. Planning allows you to simulate progress without facing consequence. You feel productive, but you're not accumulating experience. You feel prepared, but you're not developing skill. You feel organized, but you're not building results. There are people who deeply understand productivity systems. They know strategic models. They can explain processes. They can analyze performance frameworks. But their practical output hasn't changed. Because planning provides the illusion of control. Execution exposes the limits of control. And your brain notices that difference. This isn't about intelligence. It's about self-protection. When you execute, you confront your actual ability. You discover your real limits. You experience feedback that isn't flattering. Planning preserves identity. As long as something remains theoretical, you can believe it would work if applied. As long as you're refining it, you can say you're almost ready. There is always an elegant justification. I just want to do it properly. I'm preparing thoroughly. I don't want to waste effort. The timing isn't ideal. None of these statements sound like avoidance, but there is a difference between increasing readiness and avoiding exposure. Resistance rarely looks like fear. It looks like refinement. You revise because it's not perfect yet. You delay because it could be optimized. You restructure because there's still room for improvement. The brain reframes postponement as strategy, and because planning is socially rewarded, it becomes an intelligent-looking shield. No one criticizes someone for being overly organized. On the contrary, it's admired, which makes the self-deception almost invisible. In the short term, nothing seems wrong. You're busy, you're analyzing, you're refining, but time keeps moving. While you polish your system, someone else is accumulating imperfect repetitions. While you optimize your structure, someone else is making visible mistakes and learning. The difference doesn't show up in the first month or the second. It shows years later, when you realize you have theoretical clarity but limited practical evidence. You can explain the process, but you haven't produced results. You know how it should work, but you haven't tested it under pressure. You understand the principles, but you haven't accumulated proof. Extended planning creates a constant feeling of almost there, and that feeling can last for years. It isn't dramatic, it's subtle. It's the gap between intention and execution that never fully closes. And because you're always in preparation, it never feels like quitting. It feels responsible. But responsibility that never turns into movement is just elegant delay. Delayed beginnings create patterns. You start with enthusiasm. You design everything carefully. You structure every detail. But real execution keeps getting pushed slightly forward. Each new plan renews the feeling of progress. The problem is that emotional progress is not actual progress. Infinite preparation does not generate compounding effect. Practice does. Exposure does. Mistakes do. Planning organizes action. It does not replace it. If it replaces it, it becomes shelter, and constant shelter becomes comfortable stagnation. Maybe planning isn't the problem. Maybe it's the role planning is playing in your life. Is it organizing action, or is it postponing discomfort? How many times have you reorganized before executing? How many refinements were made to something that never started? How many improvements were excuses to avoid exposure? There is an invisible boundary between preparation and avoidance. It isn't announced. It doesn't feel irresponsible. It feels mature. And precisely because it feels mature, it goes unnoticed. If your planning is detailed, optimized, structured, but execution remains postponed, maybe the issue isn't lack of method. Maybe it's a highly organized way of staying exactly where you are. And that possibility is harder to sit with than it sounds. Because admitting it means losing the most socially acceptable excuse available. I'm preparing. Sometimes you're not preparing, you're protecting. And excessive protection has a cost. Not immediate, not dramatic, but cumulative. Cumulative enough that years from now, you may realize you were too busy organizing to notice you weren't moving.